You'll understand when you're more successful, my dad declared as I ate alone on my birthday. That night, my aunt posted, "Proof of our star." It was my sister holding a trophy from her soccer league. I paid the $2,500 dinner tab, drove home, and terminated the car insurance, phone plan, and utility bills I'd been quietly covering. By sunrise, my voicemail was full, but I didn't listen to a single one of them. I, 32M, sat alone at the upscale Italian restaurant, checking my watch for the 7th time in 20 minutes. The reservation was for 7, and it was already 8:15. The waiter had refilled my water glass 3 times and kept giving me those pitying looks that service staff reserve for people who've clearly been stood up. My phone buzzed. A text from Mom saying they were running late because my sister had practice that ran over. No apology, no asking if we should reschedule. Just a statement of fact, like I was supposed to understand that my birthday dinner came second to a recreational soccer league for adults. I'd been planning this for weeks. Made the reservation at Dad's favorite place, the one where he always ordered the Osso Buco and complained about the wine prices while ordering another bottle anyway. I even took the afternoon off work to get everything ready. Picked up the cake from that bakery across town that Mom always raved about. At 8:30, they finally showed up. Dad walked in first, still in his golf clothes, not even bothering to change for dinner. Mom followed, apologizing to the hostess for being late, like she was the one who mattered. My sister brought up the rear, scrolling through her phone and wearing her grass-stained cleats into a restaurant where most people dressed up. Dad slid into the booth across from me and immediately started talking about his golf game, how he'd finally broken 85 after months of lessons. Mom chimed in about how proud she was, how he'd been working so hard on his swing. My sister didn't look up from her phone once. The waiter came over and Dad ordered for everyone without asking what we wanted. The usual for him and Mom, something light for my sister because she had to watch her figure for soccer. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything special, Dad just shrugged and said it was a family dinner. I sat there listening to them talk about everything except the fact that it was my birthday. Dad went on about work, how his latest project was going to put him up for partner track at his firm. Mom talked about the garden club fundraiser she was organizing. My sister finally put down her phone long enough to complain about her coach making the team run extra laps. When the food arrived, Dad started cutting into his Osso Buco and launched into one of his lectures about success. He told me I needed to understand that life was about priorities, about making sacrifices for the things that really mattered. He looked around the restaurant, at the other families celebrating birthdays with balloons and singing waiters, and said I'd understand when I was more successful. The words hit me like ice water. Here I was, paying for their dinner, taking time off work, trying to create a nice memory, and he was telling me I wasn't successful enough to understand family priorities. I'd been supporting half their expenses for the past 2 years, ever since Dad's firm cut his hours and Mom decided to become a stay-at-home garden club president. But none of that seemed to register. I excused myself to use the restroom and checked my phone. My aunt had posted on Facebook, "Proof of our star," with a photo of my sister holding up some participation trophy from her soccer league. 37 likes and a string of comments about how talented she was, how proud the family must be. My birthday dinner was happening at the same time, but somehow this plastic trophy was worth documenting for social media. I stared at that post for a long minute, then scrolled through my aunt's profile. Photos of my sister at various family gatherings, my parents at holiday parties, everyone looking happy and successful. I tried to remember the last time any of them had posted anything about me, my job, my achievements. The silence was telling. When I got back to the table, they were deep in conversation about my sister's upcoming tournament. Mom was worried about the travel costs, whether they could afford the hotel rooms and gas money. Dad was calculating how many days he'd need to take off work to drive her to all the games. Neither of them seemed to remember that I'd offered to help with those expenses months ago, just like I'd been helping with everything else. The evening dragged on like that, with me sitting there watching them plan their lives around my sister's hobby while treating my actual birthday like an inconvenience. When the check came, Dad made a show of reaching for his wallet, but I waved him off like always. $2,500 for dinner, wine, and their celebration of everything except the reason we were supposed to be there. I drove home in silence, thinking about that Facebook post, about Dad's comment, about the way they'd walked into that restaurant like they were doing me a favor. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at my house, the one I'd bought with my own money from my apparently unsuccessful career. Inside, I went straight to my laptop and opened up my accounts. The car insurance that covered Dad's BMW and Mom's SUV. The phone plan that included all their unlimited data and international calling. The utility bills for their house that I'd been quietly paying since Dad's hours got cut. All of it adding up to nearly $1,000 a month that they'd somehow forgotten came from my unsuccessful life. I started with the car insurance. Clicked through the cancellation process. Confirmed the effective date as tomorrow morning. The phone plan was next, for lines that would be disconnected within 24 hours. Then the utilities, one by one, scheduled for termination at the end of the billing cycle. By the time I was finished, it was almost sunrise. My phone had been buzzing constantly with texts and calls, but I'd turned the volume off hours ago. I could see the notifications piling up on the lock screen, but I didn't feel any urge to read them. I made coffee and sat on my back porch. Watching the sun come up over the neighborhood I'd worked my unsuccessful ass off to afford. The quiet felt good after months of managing their crises, covering their bills, organizing their lives while they complained about my lack of success. Update 1. The calls started before 7 in the morning. My phone showed 43 missed calls by the time I finally looked at it around noon. Dad, Mom, my sister, even my aunt who'd posted that Facebook photo. The voicemail icon showed a full inbox, but I wasn't ready to hear whatever explanations or excuses they had prepared. I went to work instead, focused on the job that apparently wasn't successful enough to earn their respect, but was successful enough to fund their lifestyle. My colleague mentioned that I seemed different, more relaxed somehow. I didn't tell her that I'd just removed myself from the family emergency contact list for the first time in years. Around 3, Dad showed up at my office. The receptionist called to tell me he was in the lobby, demanding to see me about a family emergency. I told her to inform him that I was in meetings all afternoon and couldn't be disturbed. Through my office window, I watched him argue with her for 10 minutes before finally leaving. The texts kept coming throughout the day. Mom saying there must have been some mistake with the insurance company. My sister panicking about her phone being shut off before her tournament. Dad demanding I call him immediately to discuss this misunderstanding. None of them seemed to grasp that this wasn't a billing error or technical glitch. That evening, I finally listened to the voicemails. Dad started angry, accusing me of sabotaging the family over some petty disagreement. By message 15, his tone had shifted to concerned confusion. By message 30, he was asking if I was having some kind of breakdown and needed professional help. Mom's messages followed a similar pattern, starting with assumptions that I'd made a mistake and escalating to genuine worry when she realized the cancellations were intentional. She kept saying she didn't understand why I was doing this, that we were family and family took care of each other. My sister's voicemails were the most interesting. The first few were angry demands that I fix her phone immediately because she had important calls to make about her tournament. But the later messages showed she'd started to piece things together, realizing how many of their monthly expenses had been coming out of my unsuccessful income. Update 2. By the weekend, they'd moved past denial into negotiation mode. Mom showed up at my house Saturday morning with fresh-baked cookies and my favorite coffee from the place downtown. She wanted to talk about what had upset me, assuring me that we could work through whatever was bothering me about the family dynamic. She sat at my kitchen table and explained how much stress Dad had been under since his hours got reduced, how they'd been struggling to maintain their standard of living. She talked about my sister's potential athletic scholarships, how important it was to invest in her future. She mentioned how grateful they all were for my help over the years, even if they didn't always express it properly. I let her talk, nodding in the right places while she painted a picture of a family pulling together during tough times. When she finished, I asked her if she remembered what we'd been celebrating at dinner on Tuesday. The confusion in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She left the cookies but took her expectations with her. That afternoon, I got a text from Dad asking if we could meet for lunch to discuss the situation like adults. I replied that adults typically remember their children's birthdays without being reminded. Sunday brought my sister to my door. She'd driven over in Dad's BMW, which she'd apparently been using since her own car insurance had been canceled along with theirs. She wanted to know if I was planning to ruin her entire soccer season over one dinner that didn't go perfectly. She stood in my living room, still in her cleats, demanding to know what my problem was with the family supporting her athletic goals. She reminded me that I'd never played sports, that I didn't understand the commitment required to compete at her level. She said I was being selfish and immature, punishing everyone because I wasn't getting enough attention. I asked her what she thought my athletic goals had been at her age, what hobbies or interests she remembered me having that the family had supported. The silence stretched between us until she finally admitted she'd never really thought about it. I was just the older brother who helped out with money sometimes, not a person with my own dreams that had been quietly pushed aside for everyone else's priorities. Update 3. The family meeting happened on Wednesday, exactly 1 week after my birthday dinner. They'd coordinated their schedules and invited me to lunch at the same restaurant where this had all started. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I agreed to hear them out. Dad had prepared what sounded like a presentation for a client meeting. He acknowledged that they'd made mistakes in how they'd handled my birthday, admitted that they'd been taking my financial help for granted. He outlined a plan for paying me back over time and promised they'd be more attentive to important dates going forward. Mom added her own apologies, explaining how overwhelmed she'd been with managing everyone's schedules and forgetting to prioritize the things that really mattered. She pulled out her phone and showed me where she'd added my birthday to her calendar with multiple reminders, as if the problem was organizational rather than fundamental. My sister's contribution was the most surprising. She'd done some math and figured out roughly how much I'd been contributing to their monthly expenses. She offered to get a part-time job to help cover her own costs, said she was willing to skip some tournaments to reduce the family's travel budget. They waited for my response, looking hopeful and slightly nervous. I could see they'd put thought into this approach, tried to address what they assumed were my main concerns. But they'd missed the deeper issue entirely. I told them I appreciated the effort, but this wasn't really about money or birthday celebrations. It was about respect and recognition, about being seen as a person rather than a resource. For years, I've been the family safety net while being treated like I was the one who needed to prove my worth. Dad interrupted to remind me that family members help each other, that my success gave me opportunities to support the people I loved. I asked him what exactly he thought my success looked like from the inside, whether he'd ever wondered what I might have wanted to do with that money if I hadn't been covering their shortfalls. The conversation ended with them promising to think about what I'd said, to try to understand my perspective better. But I could see in their faces that they still didn't quite grasp why I was making such a big deal out of what seemed like normal family dynamics to them. Update 4. 3 months later, the dust has mostly settled into a new normal that none of us expected. They've managed to adjust their budget to cover their own expenses, with Dad picking up some consulting work and Mom taking a part-time job at the garden center she'd been volunteering with. My sister got that part-time job she'd offered, working at a sports equipment store that gives her a discount on gear. The family gatherings are different now, smaller and more intentional. We meet for coffee instead of expensive dinners, split checks without discussion, and somehow the conversations feel more balanced. Dad asks about my work projects instead of just talking about his own. Mom remembers important dates and actually celebrates them. My sister has started texting me about things that aren't requests for money or rides. The most surprising change has been in how they talk about success. Dad's consulting work has been going well, but he started measuring it differently, focusing on the satisfaction of the projects rather than just the potential for advancement. Mom's garden center job has given her a sense of purpose that her volunteer work never quite provided. My sister's still playing soccer, but she's also exploring other interests that don't require family investment. As for me, I've been using that $1,000 a month to fund some goals I'd put on hold for years. I'm taking photography classes, planning a trip to Iceland I've been dreaming about since college, and I've started contributing to causes I care about instead of just covering other people's bills. The relationship isn't perfect, and there are still moments when the old patterns try to reassert themselves. But there's something different in how we interact now, a recognition that we're all adults with our own lives and priorities. They've learned to manage without me as their financial backup plan, and I've learned that setting boundaries doesn't destroy relationships, it just makes them more honest. Last month was my birthday again, and this time they remembered without reminders. We went to a small restaurant where the check came to $60 total, split 4 ways. Dad gave a toast about family and growth and learning from mistakes. Mom brought a homemade cake that was better than anything from that expensive bakery. My sister put her phone away for the entire evening and actually asked me about the photography class I'd mentioned. It wasn't the birthday celebration I'd imagined when I made that reservation a year ago, But it was something better, an evening where I felt like an equal member of the family rather than just their financial benefactor. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to participate in the patterns that diminish you and letting people figure out how to value what they've been taking for granted. The most satisfying moment came when my aunt posted a family photo from that dinner on Facebook. The caption read, "Celebrating our amazing son/brother and his latest photography exhibition." It was a small thing, but it represented a shift in how the family saw me. Not as someone who'd understand when I became more successful, but as someone whose success had always been worth recognizing.